Thank you very much. I'm going to speak in English because it's the language I know.
I spoke in Portuguese and I don't know Portuguese.
Okay, next time. I'm really pleased to be here today and this week. I want to thank our sponsors, of course, Isabel, Greg, Marina, Kai, Flavia, and I'm going to talk about California's experience in public access and beaches for a little bit. Already today, I think I've heard something from every presentation that resonates with some things that I'll allude to, maybe not in much detail, but there's a lot that we share thinking about this questions of beach access and the public. And so I want to start by saying, I picked the title for today because I think, in California, we've done something quite amazing in the last 50 years, on one hand. But I'm also really concerned about the next 50 years and whether it is going to be the end of something amazing or the beginning of something transformative, potentially. So, there's a lot to think about and a lot ahead that I just don't know what the prospects are. So the story begins more than 50 years ago in California, and we were beginning to see the walling off of our beaches. Development was happening. It was beginning to block the public's ability to get to the beach, to the shoreline. People were very concerned, so we had a public vote, Proposition 20, and this declared very strongly the coastal zone is a distinct and valuable natural resource belonging to all of the people. So we made that political statement more than 50 years ago that our beaches were for everyone and that we were going to permanently protect them. So this is a comic strip 50 years ago, Dennis the Menace coming home and saying, I went to the beach, but I couldn't find it. It was gone. That was 50 years ago. Mm-hmm. So we passed a law based on the proposition, the California Coastal Act, and it's a very strong law. With public access, it basically says we're going to protect and provide maximum public access for all the people to and along the shoreline. And so we used that law. We created the Coastal Commission. You just heard I was a member of this Coastal Commission for many years. We made this commission, and through the development process of regulation, planning and regulation, we've opened up shorelines in a lot of places that might ordinarily not be open to the public, places like Pebble Beach Golf Resort. You can go down and go to the beach at the 5th hole, enjoy yourself as a member of the public. Half Moon Bay Resort Ritz, other expensive places where public access was not necessarily available, but we used the law to gain that access. But one of the main things we did was use the regulatory process for development to gain public access along the shoreline. So this is a photo from Malibu, where all of those colored squares you see along the beach are public easements for the public to use the shoreline. They were got by the state through the regulatory process. So in exchange for building a house or building a bigger house, the state would say, give us public access between your house and the mean high tide line. Those are all public dedications gained through that process. We also spent time trying to get access to the beach, what we call a vertical access, and that's the one in the oval there that you see. This particular access was received through the regulatory process in the early 1980s, but it wasn't open until the mid-2000s. So it took more than 20 years of legal battles with the property owner to open that access way up. You can see it on the pictures here. That's the beach, Carbon Beach, Billionaire's Beach, called by some. And it opened up the access for the public to be able to use that beach in that section of Malibu that had become closed. But it's a very controversial process, lots of litigation over the years about these access ways, depending on how invested the private property owners were to stopping access. And it became so controversial that in the 2000s, it became a topic of this comic strip, Doonesbury, where Zonker is asking, is David Geffen still blocking beach access? And he says, yes, but he's been blocking it. The music lord's been blocking access for 19 years. And he says, what? No way. I thought it was the law that the beach was everyone's. And it says, no, sorry, mansion owners are now a law unto themselves. So we've had this tension between private affluence, private money, private power, and the public's ability to get to the beach. Fast forward 20 years, this is that same house. You can see the access way on this side here that was David Geffen's property at the time. The Coastal Commission did another permit. They needed a new little wall at the base of the property to protect the house from the waves. The Coastal Commission, this was in 2000, was already beginning to see sea level rise, climate change. And so they made findings that, okay, because of sea level rise, you can have your wall, but you must put it back as far as possible from the shoreline in anticipation of the ocean coming up higher. So this is the beginning of the move to the new problem that is on the horizon at the time. Well, since then, we've done lots of science, of course, and we all know that this is not a new problem so much as an accelerating problem. So sea level rise has been happening in California. Those are quotes from 50 years ago when we said most of California's shoreline is eroding. So we need to think about how to manage that. But you can see that it's an accelerating trend. So this challenge of how to deal with beaches, public access, and development immediately adjacent to it is only going to be getting more challenging. We have lots of great science coming out, models that are showing us what the shoreline is going to look like with 1 meter, 2 meters, or 3 meters of sea level rise. And these are just projections. This is from my campus in Santa Barbara, where the shoreline is projected to be with different levels of sea level rise. Exactly when, we don't know, but we know pretty good how much it's going to change when it changes. And the problem is that we have many places like this photo of Del Mar in Southern California, where you have development right on the beach. And when that shoreline begins to move, you're going to lose that beach if nothing else changes, right? So this is showing you where the shoreline is projected to be with 1 meter of sea level rise, maybe by 2100, maybe earlier. And you can see that the shoreline is projected to be inland of where the development currently is. So that's a problem, right? If we like beach access, we want to be able to walk on our beaches. This is that same beach today at a king tide, a high tide. You can already see that the coastal squeeze, which we heard about earlier, is real. It's already being experienced, and that's not going to get better if we don't change the development pattern or do something else like beach replenishment, perhaps. We have many, many, many communities on California's coast in that situation. We've got residential development on sand spits. We've got Malibu, of course. We've got Santa Cruz, Ventura County. Most of our urbanized locations have development right on the beach where this is going to be an issue. We also have complicated situations where it's not just housing, such as on this photo up on the top of the bluff, but in between the housing and the beach, you have important infrastructure like the rail line. And so right now they're debating whether they can move this rail line inland at a cost of like $30 billion, perhaps. So we know what happens when we fix the back of the shoreline and you have rising seas or eroding shorelines. When you build a seawall, you lose the beach. And this is just an example from the city of Pacifica in near San Francisco, where you can see how the beach has changed, where the rocks were put in front of the development. One of my favorite examples, this is also in Central California. In the upper left photo, you see a continuous lateral beach in front of those residential lots in 1972. In the center and the bottom is today. You can see how the houses on the left and the right built rock revetments to protect themselves from the erosion. The lot in the middle was empty for many years. There's no revetment there, and you can see there's still the beach because the beach has been able to move back as it wants to do naturally. Right? So we know what's going to happen in these places that have hardened shorelines. And many of our communities have now done vulnerability assessments under a sea level rise grant program that the state has been sponsoring. They're all showing the same thing. Depending on how much sea level rise you have, you're going to lose X feet of beach width over a certain period of time. That's what all of these pictures show in small pocket beaches in Santa Cruz, the wide sandy beach in Huntington Beach, Marin County. All the beaches are projected to disappear eventually. One of the common cited studies in California says maybe 2/3 of Southern California's beaches will be submerged by 2100, lacking any alternatives. So, you know, that's a big issue, right? The loss of our beaches without any response to sea level rise. One of the fundamental concerns we have is, what is this going to mean for public trust resources? So even though we stated our desire that the public has the beach between the mean high tide and the upland areas, below the mean high tide is understood to be public trust lands, would be the federal sea space, similar. And so as sea level rises, that line between the public and sometimes private beaches is going to be increasingly moving underneath these situations like you see here. And we're going to have more litigation, more legal conflict about who owns the beach. We do have a case in the state of Washington, so not California, but the same federal court district. And in this case, the federal government sued these homeowners here for putting those rocks on public tidelands. And the court referred back to common law. Somebody earlier referred to civil and common law issues. Under the common law, there's this notion that if you own property on an ambulatory boundary, like mostly rivers, if the boundary can ebb and flow, that the rights of that movement on that line accrue to both sides. So if the line moves this way, this person gets that land. If it moves this way, this person gets that land. So the judge said, well, if the line is moving inland, then the inland property owner needs to get the permission of the ocean owner in order to stop that movement. That's a pretty radical decision for what might happen on our beaches, because it means we, the public, might be able to sue private property owners for trespass onto public land as the sea moves inland. So stay tuned. Another issue we need to address, and we've heard about this also, is that we have a tremendous diversity of beaches. So we can't generalize a single answer for a particular beach environment. We have many kinds of beaches. We have many development patterns. The values, the social and economic values of those beaches depend on the context. And we also heard this a moment ago. It's not just about people. So we have increasing numbers of situations in California where beaches are being closed in order to protect other species, like marine mammals. This is a case of in San Diego. It's called Children's Pool, where we now close the beach during the harbor seal pupping time in order to allow the marine mammals to use that space. So we've started to see increasing numbers of conflicts between mostly charismatic marine mammals and people, but also other species. We care about our shorebirds. There's nesting habitats that get closed on beaches. We're increasingly talking about the beach ecology itself, invertebrates in the sand, which are the food supply for those shorebirds. And so what happens to those areas as we both increase the number of people using the beaches, but also dealing with sea level rise and erosion. Another component that has recently become part of our discussion in California is the historic cultural and tribal community interests in our beaches. We have many tribes in California historically marginalized and colonized and land taken from them in California's history. And now we're talking about trying to re-energize and support their abilities to manage our shorelines themselves, including land back, which is an effort to transfer lands back to tribes in some situations. So the complexity of who owns the beach, whose beach is it, has gotten even more complex with these cultural overlays. On the upper right here, you see a photo of a case where a beach that was taken from an African-American family in Southern California back in the early 1900s through local zoning restrictions. Essentially, they took the property, was now given back to that family through a legislative process a few years ago in California. So this has made the process of beach ownership and occupation even more complicated. That extends our picture of what is beach access even broader. You may have heard that originally the California coastal law included a policy to include affordable housing in our coastal zone. And these are quotes from the original plan in the 1970s, the one on the upper left. Why do we want to do that? Because the vision of coastal access was that well-maintained, older, less expensive housing is what we want, because that provides opportunities for people of all incomes to live near the ocean. And this is a recognition that access is not just the ability to get to somewhere to the shoreline, but being at the shoreline is part of access. And so we had a vision that everybody should be able to live along the coast, people of all incomes. If there's one single failing of our state law over the last 50 years, that would be it. So this provision in the law was there for a few years. The Coastal Commission enforced it. They required affordable housing, inclusionary housing, rental housing in the coastal zone. The legislature took it out of the law after about 4 years. So we've had this idea that beach access really is more, it goes way beyond just building stairways and making sure that people can drive their car and park, right? It's about a more holistic social experience. So that brings me to the last couple of slides, which is I'm now working on something called a beach resiliency plan for the state of California. And I think what these little snippets of our last 50 years illustrate is that beach access is a much more complex system. It's really a socio-ecological system. We need to think about beaches as composed of these different values and functions and the relationships between them. It's physical changes, it's environmental changes, it's ecological changes, it's all of the social systems that we use to make decisions about how to manage beaches that go into governance outputs that then determine our adaptive capacity. And that's what we're starting to focus on now. Flavia, you had a slide with adaptive capacity as one of your outputs. What is the capacity of our beach system to now respond to climate change, and in particular sea level rise, in order to maintain the ability to provide those things we think ought to be provided? So how are we going to maintain the values and functions of beaches? We don't think it's going to be through resistance. That's building the seawall and the inevitable loss of the beach. Rebounding, maybe in the short run, these beaches bounce back. They ebb and flow, as we heard, seasonally. But over the long term, they're going to be ebbing, not flowing. And we adapt those systems. A lot of efforts being put into adding sand to our beaches to make them bigger and more responsive. But ultimately, maybe we'll need more transformative changes to our system, like managed retreat, for example, which is something that people are talking about as a way to maintain that adaptive capacity of a beach system. We know that beaches can be resilient in certain circumstances. This is an example from Central California, where this revetment was built to protect this military structure over the years. Eventually, they could no longer save it, so they decided to remove it. The Coastal Commission said, well, while you're taking the building, please take the rocks with you. So they said, yes, sir, we'll take those. You can see what happened to the beach, right? It recovers because it's a very sandy environment in this location. It was easy for the beach to bounce back. It's now a state park. So we do have examples where the beach can be resilient. But I don't know how many of those we really have. Many of our beaches are more hardened geology, cliff back beaches. Urbanized situations, of course, are going to be difficult. And of course, most recently, and I think Mark may be talking a little bit about this, we had the tragedy of the Malibu fires in January. This is that house with the access way on the left. You can see the access way there that we had so many fights about. But this situation where so many houses along the shoreline burned, first it's like an incredible change in the system, uncertainty, what's going to happen next with climate change. But then you look at what it reveals and what it makes you think about in terms of the shoreline we have. And then the last piece is, what are we doing about this now? As far as I know, we're rebuilding back better, stronger, faster. The Coastal Commission has been cut out of the redevelopment process, at least to date. So the politics to be on the coast are strong. And that's where I'm going to leave it. That's what my concern is. Where are we going?
Eu vou ser breve, eu só anotei alguns pontos, né, que eu acho que podem ser interessantes para a discussão. Eu acho que o Dr. Charles trouxe alguns pontos que não tinham sido abordados em outras palestras anteriores, né? Eu acho que a questão do acesso não sendo só chegar à praia, né, mas também viver próximo à praia, à costa, que é algo que é mais caro, né, em qualquer lugar, né, no Rio de Janeiro, em qualquer cidade costeira. Eu acho que é um ponto interessante. Então, a questão do acesso, não apenas você chegar à praia para ir à praia, né, mas também viver próximo à praia, né, também ser uma questão de acesso. Trouxe também a questão, achei interessante, né, de algumas praias serem temporariamente fechadas devido a períodos de reprodução, né, de você ter mamíferos, de você ter aves. Eu citaria também tartarugas, né, como a gente tem também aqui na costa do Brasil, do Nordeste. Então, a praia ser fechada, o acesso ser fechado por esse uso, né, de outras espécies. Bom, e a questão da resiliência, né, então, em quem paga, né, por essas mudanças. Ele mostrou um exemplo de uma via férrea, né, uma ferrovia que está sendo ameaçada pela subida do nível do mar, erosão costeira. Então, acho que é um bem público, digamos, né? Uma ferrovia serve a muitas pessoas. E quais seriam os critérios que iriam diferenciar quem paga a conta, né, dessa realocação, quando você tem um caso para casas, né, particulares que estão sendo construídas e mantidas em áreas que sabemos estão sob ameaça, né? Então, eu acho que tem que ter uma diferença, né, entre um bem público, como uma ferrovia, uma rodovia. Isso acho que é outra questão aí também de discussão para o futuro em todos os países em geral, né?
Greetings on a late Monday afternoon. And I know it's hard to pay attention in the late afternoon because I've lectured many times with a 3 to 6 class or a 2 to 5 class. So I appreciate the attention. And like others, I want to thank the organizers for inviting Beacon to Rio to describe the experience in Southern California. And I want to thank Flavia and Marina and Isabel for all their efforts to bring the band network together and to organize this 3-continent research network. And I'm dumbfounded and astounded by how energetic the community is here. And I appreciate everybody coming to listen to people speak. But I didn't really come here to speak to you. So let me introduce my name again. I'm Mark Baylor. I'm the director of Beacon. And I think I want to change the script a little bit with regard to what we're talking to today. I think it's good that Charles finished with, he's concerned with where we're going, because I want to start with, how are we going to get there? You heard a lot today earlier about the needs of coastal planning to incorporate the people that are being planned for. It's called participatory planning. I feel the same way about the research community. So I thought I might pose a proposition to you, or a hypothesis, or ask a question. Is beach access research, can it be limited to beach access researchers? Which is to say, can it be limited to the academic community or to the government science community? I want to go back to describe that I'm a bit of an outlier here. I'm not an academic. I'm a trained researcher and I conduct research, but I'm a government official and I'm a policy bureaucrat. And I want to describe today one way in which my agency has attempted to bridge the gap between science and policy and redefined the way in which we do research. Because I do believe if it's true about planning that we have to involve the people that are the subject of planning, we have to involve the people that are subject of research and we have to bring them in. And so the title of my presentation is Co-Producing Knowledge, because I don't believe it can be done just by the management community. My community cannot plan the future alone, but I also believe that the science community can also not plan the future alone. And furthermore, we've had a lot of comments today about the future. As a personal statement, I actually participate in the research and in the policy that I study. So, in fact, I'm a participant observer. And I'm a trained sociologist, which is, so participant observation is a very legitimate method of research and reporting out. But it is important to disclose who we are individually. A lot of academics consult in the private sector, both in the United States and across the globe. And this contest between the private interest and the public goods is not a technical issue. We've had a lot of technical conversation today. It's a political issue. It's instructive that Charles mentioned that the Coastal Act was really created by a citizen initiative, the Coastal Proposition 20, Coastal Initiative. It wasn't created by the legislature as a legislative initiative. In fact, the Coastal Initiative was necessary because the legislature failed to act, because it was influenced by politics and by interests. And so I wanted to pose this question that what do we need going forward in terms of if we want to get somewhere and we want to focus on the research topic, who is that community of researchers? So I was very pleased that Beacon could join the BAN network and provide its perspective to how we can actually move forward together in a new paradigm of research as well as practice. So today I'm going to just do three things real quick. One is just tell you a little about Beacon, and then describe how we've organized our research efforts, combining managers and scientists together. So let me see if I can do this right. Charles said this already. The science tells us in the absence of increased management in Southern California, we're going to lose up to 2/3 of our beaches in less than 75 years. Whoops, sorry. And that is the value proposition of Beacon. Beacon, and I hope you can see it. You see the Los Angeles Basin on the far right of your picture, and Beacon Land, as I call it, are the counties of Ventura and Santa Barbara within the Southern California Bight, about 150 miles of the California coast. And voluntarily, the two counties and the 6 coastal cities joined together to form Beacon 40 years ago. The theory was that the agencies themselves and the governance structure themselves couldn't address issues that are regional in nature and are larger in driver and threat. And so the theory of Beacon, which we've been able to affect partially, is that through aligning the governmental structure and the physical province, we'd be better off to manage. So if you look at our map, my map, I show you all the coastal draining watersheds. That's the terrestrial land area on the map that drain into the Santa Barbara littoral cell. That's the nearshore province that Beacon manages around sediment management. And the important story there is Santa Barbara sand is Ventura's beaches. But Ventura couldn't manage its own beaches if they didn't cooperate with Santa Barbara, because the source of their beaches is external to their government structure. So in this case, we had a happy marriage. We had vision, and we had the opportunity to join governance and manage it and change it in order to make it closer to the coastal draining watersheds. And our sediment and our beaches comes from the land. So we really had to make that connection, that land-sea connection, which Beacon does very well. Beacon itself, in our vernacular, is considered a boundary organization. We're a planning and development organization, but our real function is to take science information and turn it into policy and translate it both by its language and its presentation in understandable ways to a larger stakeholder and managerial community. And in that, we have this goal to produce knowledge together. So in the last 5 years, I want to describe a little bit of our science approach. And it's instructive that Charles is here because he's actually on the Beacon Science Advisory Committee. And the reference to the science around the loss of beaches isn't been done by another member of our Beacon Science Committee, because in California, we actually have the benefit of really, really high talented science. And we've applied our science to the coastal and marine environment. So we have, I wouldn't call it an embarrassment of riches, but we have riches. And so Beacon has tried to take advantage of them. So you'll see that the process that we've engaged in it's a long view process. We're not going to solve this problem in the short view, and we have to share it. We have to share the burden of it with the largest community we can. But we did it in a thoughtful way. We developed a science strategy, as you can see, and then we developed a science advisory committee, and the science advisory committee prepared a science research agenda, and Beacon staff have been implementing that agenda with real projects, including beach access projects. And we added a managerial representatives to the Science Advisory Committee on the recommendation of the scientists. So even in the structure of how we organized our science efforts, we're trying to reflect the process by which we think good science could emerge. So here's a little snapshot of our 12-member Science Advisory Committee, and you might even recognize some of these names. They're very prominent in the marine and coastal environment community in California, and they represent the benefit of having really strong state support for academic research. So we have the UC campuses represented. We also have a state college system in California, so we have the state college system represented. We actually have private consultant science represented. We have government agency scientists represented, and then we have managerial representatives. And though it isn't a perfect system, it's just our attempt to create a better paradigm for doing research in the long term that can represent the fact that we have to invite others into our enterprises in order to gain their knowledge. And one topic that you all know about, and we talked about it a lot, and that is local knowledge. What is local knowledge? In California, it could be tribal knowledge. Here in Brazil, it could be indigenous or First Nation community knowledge. In planning in California, in the regional sphere, it could just be local residents, could be beach users, could be the surfing community or the fisher community. It has to be all of them. And we're seeking ways to figure out how to do that better and improve our product in order to produce the best research, to produce the best policy. And our supposition, or I guess our principle, is that policy is related to politics. And so we don't ever ignore that connection. I have a board of elected officials that are all elected, 8 jurisdictions, I think it's 50 of them, and they're all political, and they're all influenced by the political system. So when I present them with policy, it's not a technical issue because it involves multiple values. And we try to recognize that in our practice. Oops, sorry, I'm going backwards. So I don't want to belabor the point because I said to you that code development is a really important principle in our work, but I did want to just highlight to you how we've tried to do that. So we have a science committee that meets, but not very often. We have manager liaisons. We have a correspondence committee where we talk to our scientists outside of meetings, but we also have an annual meeting of stakeholders and managers. We call it the summit. We assemble 60, 75 people. We spend almost a whole day in conversation, and the presentations and the discussions are two-way. Everybody who comes is really a presenter. Everybody who comes is a listener and a learner. And we have peer learning network approach. So I think it's important for you to understand how we're trying to do our work, because we placed a lot of money on this bet, because we believe that the current methodologies don't work. The current paradigms of research don't work. They work for how they're supposed to work, but they're too siloed. You all know this. You work in silos. And half the conversation today was breaking silos and doing interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary work. And that's what the work of Beacon's tried to achieve through our Science Advisory Committee, because our committee is 11 disciplines, very broad between social and physical and ecological. And we're trying to stitch these connections together. And I thought Charles's statement about SES was a really important one. We cannot analyze social conditions in the absence of ecological and physical conditions within our beaches and our region. But we can't do the reverse either. And we need to integrate all those values simultaneously. So in a way, we're trying to solve a differential calculus problem, a simultaneous equation. And you got to solve them all at the same time. And if you don't solve them all at the same time, you're not going to solve the question. And that's really tough. I think this is actually tough business. I think this is very labor intensive. It's time intensive. It's based on trust and experience, common language, sorting out difficulties and differences. I think we're doing what is more difficult than less difficult in terms of how we organize process. So my conversation today with you is about process, not really about the technical products, because I don't believe that beach access issue is a technical issue. I believe it's a community issue and a political issue, and we try to follow that. We build our policies on the best science. So we're not tone deaf to science. In fact, Charles and others are establishing the best coastal science in the world, along with the rest of you. So we use evidence-based measures to do our policy development, but we don't ignore the political or the social content. And we know that there are unequal access to everything: power, knowledge, place. And we're trying to break down some of those in the knowledge sphere and in the place sphere. I did want to report, and I will report, I guess, on Friday, the results of some of the research we've undertaken on the beach access issue. We've also tried to pioneer new sources and methods of data. So we pioneered the use of traditional surveys for how many people are on the beach and what are people doing on the beach with large-scale big data. We've taken cell phone data because we didn't know where people were coming from. Even though we've done surveys, when we do surveys, they're very costly and they're small numbers. So we live in a region of 22 million people, and we'll do a beach access survey and it'll be 1,200 people. It's not valid, it's just a small sample. With the big data, we have the chance to actually collect origin information for the beach users. And by virtue of talking with our research partners, going through the politics of how we count who we are. So in America and the United States, we use census data. And that's how we count who we are. It's not accurate. It's not even a fair representation of who we are, because the census, just like beach access and the science, is political. So we overcount white people in America, and we undercount underrepresented minorities. So you'd be surprised to learn that the census in 2020 in the United States counted Middle Eastern and North African ethnic residents of the United States as white. When you put that on a histogram or curve or something, and you say, so what's the distribution of the beach access community here? If you keep those categories, they're white primarily, which reinforces a conventional wisdom that the coast is an exclusive province of a certain segment of the population. When you take out the Latino Hispanic community, which has also been considered in the white category, and you take out the Middle Eastern and Africa, you totally flip the script. All Southern California beaches are majority. That's not the right term, but you know what I'm saying. Minority dominant population that has the power and owns the coast and lives on the coast. And we're trying to communicate the political value that everybody should be on the coast against the dominant paradigm that misrepresents that the coast is a locked up community, and it's not. Our data shows that some of the beaches are 55% non-white, and very representative of the diversity of Southern California. But until we unpacked that political, technical counting of who we are in America, we couldn't figure out who actually was at the beach. Now that we know through our data where the origins of the beach users are better, now we can survey them more properly. Now we can understand and have a conversation with them. But as far as that goes, and it came up earlier today, what are some of the substantive research methods that we're changing? We don't think surveys are sufficient. We don't think intercept surveys are sufficient. We think dialogue has to go on. We think focus groups and small group penetration and long-term format journaling for young beach users. We think non-traditional methods of data and knowledge collection are essential to get a full flavor for what the beach is and what the beach means to people, because it means a million different things. And what we're learning is that our charting of beach activities, the activities at the beach have grown, and the beach is a much more important democratic public space in our community than it's ever been. And we saw that in COVID. In COVID, the beaches grew in attendance by up to 3 times. So traditional X, 3X. And they did that because all the parks and all the schools were closed for a whole year, and people had nowhere to go. But the beach remained a free, public, open, democratic space. And I believe that the future is not predicted, the future is made. And we don't know what the future is in the power relation or the use of the beach. And I'm going to say that it will remain a contested terrain as long as we have to assert that the beach is not sufficiently representative of what the vision was for beach access. I think it's instructive that Charles mentioned the Coastal Act, but also mentioned the definition of what the public beach is in California. So we have a challenge. The Coastal Act says the beaches are public, but people think that the beaches mean dry, sandy beaches. But unless the state has acquired those through easement, through fee, those are not a priority public resources. Those are private property potentially. Now, historically, they could be used by the public, and then through a legal process, they could be claimed as public. But in our community, we have weak definition of the public beach, but a strong coastal act to require public access. So it's a conundrum, actually, and it's not a full plate one way or the other. I think I might have gone over my time. So I'm just going to mention that in addition to the Science Advisory Committee we established to help us guide us in our research, when we do research, we do it with a partnership of the user community and the science community. So we have a coastal research access working group that sponsored our cell phone research. We have the official academic researchers, we have the government representative research, and then we have management agencies involved. And we just think that's a paradigm that we're going to follow, but we're going to have a dialogue with you about what are the best ways to do it. It's not a model, it's just one model that we've used. But we do think going forward, to answer Charles's question, that if we don't change these methods that we use, I'm just going to go through this real quick. Oops, sorry. Oh, I may have gone too far. I just wanted to go to my last slide. Thank you for helping me. Yes, and I will just go. Just keep going. Oops, that's it. So just in the interest of time, because I want to keep you awake as opposed to asleep, it's a little early to go to sleep here. My concluding remarks is that Beacon has recommendations that we develop new research methods, and I believe we're doing that, and new sources of data and new ways to engage others in our research. We have a particular need to reach out to communities that are traditionally disenfranchised, underrepresented, and we're going to spend time doing that. In our community, we do have historic Native American community called the Chumash tribe, and we have an obligation, and we exercise that, to coordinate with them. And this is very interesting with regard to research. Like, why would we care? Well, because when we are doing a regional monitoring program for coastal adaptation, the condition of the physical coastal resources come up. But if we didn't dialogue with our Chumash neighbors. We wouldn't know that those physical resources are a cultural resource for dress, for money, for food, and we would miss why they're important if they're not otherwise important to the larger economy or to the contemporary culture, which they're not necessarily. But seagrass, kelp resources, sandy beach and dunes integrated with wetlands, these are all tremendously important cultural and societal resources for the Chumash. And this is their land that we practice on. So I'll leave it there, that I'm happy to be here, really excited, happy to discuss how we can go forward to where we want to go. Beacon is a little different from some of the other participants of the BAM network, because our value is we believe the beach is for everybody. We believe that science is important, but it has to be actionable. It has to be applied to policy so we actually make change and change the conditions under which beach access is currently available, at least in our community of Southern California. So I look forward to the next several days. Thank you for your patience this afternoon. And I hope you have a great evening tonight. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Really interesting. I didn't know really what Beacon was about, and really realmente uma abordagem interessante que a gente pode discutir muito mais, né, nesses dias agora, ainda hoje, amanhã no campo, enfim, uma abordagem que eu acho que vai ser mais efetiva, né, nas suas ações.
So just a very quick thank you, but a very sincere one. It's getting late, okay? So I'm getting right to the point. So, in France, public access to beaches is not framed as a public policy issue as such. You don't usually hear officials debating it. You don't see advocacy campaigns or NGOs fighting for it. Generally speaking, it's taken for granted that seashores are free and open to everyone. The widely shared assumption is that anyone can go to the beach with no distinction or restriction. Beaches are, in fact, one of the few natural spaces still presumed to be free and accessible to all. This isn't really the case with forests, for example, which have become a visible social and political issue in recent years. French forests are heavily privatized. Only a quarter of national forest cover is public, whether state-owned or municipal. The Public Forestry Service itself is being gradually dismantled to push towards privatization. In contrast, beaches remain both objectively and subjectively public spaces. You may hear or read about private beaches in the Mediterranean context. These refer to beach sections occupied by private businesses, as we will explain. But this is technically a misnomer. Moreover, these are considered exceptions that don't challenge the prevailing principle of free access. This principle is legally established while providing for specific exceptions. As a rule, the law ensures free public access to beaches. This rule was included in the 1986 Coastal Law, which remains the country's reference text to this day. It's currently codified in the French Environmental Code. As you can see, the principle is not exclusive. Other legitimate uses are mentioned, such as fishing. The principle isn't unconditional either. Exceptions are provided for three main reasons: security, defense, and ecology. Now, there is one important exception to the principle of free access. This exception is partial but permanent: beach concessions. A beach concession is a contract through which public authorities allow private, profit-seeking actors to occupy part of the beach in order to run commercial activities, mainly deck chair and mattress rental, bars, and restaurants. This happens under certain conditions and in exchange for fee payment for the benefit of the central state and local authorities. This is indeed a derogation from the principle of free access. On the granted parcels, which are materially delimited, access is reserved for paying customers. Yet, legally speaking, these beach plots aren't exactly private or privatized. They remain public property, even though they operate as private businesses. Beach restaurants benefit from temporary economic occupation authorization. Since about 2 decades, the system of beach concessions has even been considered a delegation of public service. That's why this transaction comes with strict conditions. Only a maximum of 20% of natural beach area can be conceded. Also, establishments are supposed to preserve a significant stretch of sand between the sea and the first line of deck chairs so that people can walk along the shore. Overall, beach concessions constitute a special provision, but it concerns only a small portion of the French coastline, mostly in the French Riviera, and shouldn't challenge the principle of free access.
So it may be tempting to compare principles with practices to identify gaps. From this perspective, we can observe how some commercial establishments don't respect their obligations and encroach on public domain, thereby restricting free access. That said, we must begin by noting that these principles themselves have been contested throughout the 20th century, especially with the advent of mass tourism. This appears in the way regular legal work has been necessary to clarify or reaffirm beach-related principles. The 1986 coastal law, Greg already mentioned, resulted from 2 decades of quite intense conflicts over coastal occupation. Before that, a law adopted in 1963 had extended France's maritime public domain by including future tidal zones, basically areas that get covered and uncovered by the tides. More recently, a new beach decree was adopted in 2006. This decree more clearly regulates beach concession organization, even though the first official text on this matter dates back from 1912. In short, before we criticize how laws are applied, we should bear in mind that legal rules themselves reflect ongoing power struggles between different interest groups. Even though the principle of public access is a long-standing one, it has constantly been threatened by attempts at private appropriation, whether residential or commercial. When it comes to practices, there are, roughly speaking, 3 types of conflicts. First, conflicts related to beach use itself. The principle of free access doesn't mean freedom of use. On the contrary, the very fact that it's a public space prevents certain uses. Prohibitions are actually quite numerous. For example, making fires on the beach is strictly forbidden in France. And since last June, smoking cigarettes that are also prohibited. Besides, walking completely naked is forbidden outside areas dedicated to nudism. Less known is that it's also prohibited to take sand or pebbles or seagrass home with you. Even removing dead seagrass, especially Posidonia oceanica, which is endemic to the Mediterranean Sea, is forbidden, as they are an integral part of the fragile ecosystem. Second types of conflicts, the one related to private residential property encroachment on the public domain. These typically involve private owners who build illegally on the maritime public domain, or they unlawfully appropriate a portion of the shoreline, thereby impeding free circulation. Legal rules on urban planning even provide for a right of passage covering a street of at least 3 meters wide along the entire French coastline. This is the French version of the right to roam. In principle, it takes precedence over property rights. 3 conflicts related to authorized commercial activities on beaches. These typically involve beach restaurants that don't respect their obligations. They exceed their allocated portion, or don't leave enough space to let people walk on dry sand. Historically, owners or managers of beach businesses have often played with the rules. For example, the rule requiring beach establishments to be removed during off-season It is an old rule, but it has never been respected until very recently. Thus, while public beach access isn't really framed as a public policy issue in its own right, the question of public beach access emerges now and then. This happens on the occasion of disputes, often related to legal cases. Strong disputes emerged in the 60s and the 70s when the system of beach concessions was durably established. This was completely different from what you see here in Rio with beach kiosks. You have to picture massive beach restaurants. We are talking about hundreds of square meters with some hard-built structures planted right next to the waterline. Several local battles took on national scope. State officials, including ministers, had to intervene publicly on the subject, both in newspapers and on TV. And since then, there have been such conflicts handled by courts, but they receive little media coverage. They are generally considered anomalies, violations of the general principle of free access. So they don't call into question the principle, but rather allow for its confirmation.
In recent years, what has actually become a distinct public issue in France is coastal erosion and sea level rise. Media coverage of this issue has clearly amplified over the last decade, displaying examples of their potential and actual effects on seaside buildings, as well as on the shrinking of certain beaches. This might seem logical for a coastal country such as France, which is considered the world's second maritime space after the USA. It has multiple coastlines, including the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, the Pacific, not to forget the English Channel. Of course, coastal erosion isn't just a French problem. Living in Rio, you know this all too well. However, in France, at least, media coverage is not consistent enough to raise public awareness. First, media coverage of this problem remains sporadic and reactive. It is generally triggered by a report or study, or it's prompted by a natural disaster such as violent storms or serious landslides, calling for emergency measures. Yet, this doesn't make headlines for several consecutive days, much less weeks, contrary to the Paris Olympic Games, for example. Second, media coverage often remains narrowly local. It laments the disappearance of this or that beach, but it rarely sets the cases within a global dynamic. And this is problematic because current international scientific debate on this issue concerns risks of disappearance beaches on a worldwide scale. And third, the problem isn't framed or formulated as a public access issue in its own right. This is paradoxical since nothing threatens beach access more than the shrinking or even vanishing of beaches themselves.
So now let's turn to our research site, Pamplona Beach, located in the Saint-Tropez Peninsula. As you probably know, Búzios is often considered the Saint-Tropez of Brazil. So think of Pamplona as the original template for glamorous beach destinations that attract international celebrities, not only show business, but also big business. While it's hardly representative of the whole French coast, it's at the heart of these issues in several key ways. First, it was the historical birthplace of the Mediterranean model of beaches, that is, commercially exploited beaches, like in Italy. We generally date this model's emergence to the mid-50s, but there were earlier signs before World War II. In the 30s, a film shoot was accompanied by the creation of an exotic-inspired beach club, which is presented locally as the first of its kind in the world. Pamplona then established itself in the 60s as a benchmark. It became a famous tourist resource on an international scale, constructing the myth of Saint-Tropez while serving as a pilot site for tourism planning. Second, Pamplona Beach has been the object of endless legal contention. This includes not only numerous disputes related to beach concession allocation, but also rules and regulations that affected its commercial exploitation locally while having an impact nationally. In fact, Pamplona benefits from a kind of exceptional legal status. This reflects the influence of pressure exerted by beach owners and managers, as well as powerful customers. So much so that in 2000, Pamplona Beach benefited from a special legal derogation to the coastal law. It was called the Gaia Amendment, named after a French member of parliament, not after the hypothesis proposed by James Lovelock and Neil Margulis. Specially made for Pamplona, this amendment allowed continued economic exploitation for establishments predating the coastal law, provided that they could reconcile economic activity with ecological protection. And this, even when France's highest court declared Pamplona Beach a remarkable natural space 2 years later in 2002, a ruling that should have prevented any beach establishment presence. Then, the beach concession system was maintained by the 2006 Beach Decree. This required that a new development plan be implemented respecting some major principles. These were actually old ones, but never respected. And this particularly involved a landward retreat to the back of the beach and removing of facilities during off-season. Third, Pamplona Beach is now acclaimed as a development model at the national level and beyond. This is due to a master plan adopted in 2015, which is often presented as unique in France, even Europe. It actually received EU financial support of nearly 1.8 million euros via the European Regional Development Fund. Acknowledging threats to a beach that was suffering, this plan has deployed a twofold action. It addresses both terrestrial environment and marine environment, with dune restoration on one side and the creation of a light mooring zone for yachts. To do this, it integrates to some extent the idea of managed retreats from the coast. And on its very recent 10th anniversary, last July, this plan was hailed as a success and a model by all actors, be they public or private. Yet, despite all its virtues, two key limitations emerge. To get the full picture, we need to shift from law to sociology, because the real issue isn't just about legal access rights. It's about who actually has the power to shape and to enjoy these spaces. From this perspective, let's turn to social inequality and environmental justice on the one hand, beach commodification and coastal capitalism on the other hand.
Socio-environmental inequalities at Pamplona are both evident and invisible. One need only walk along the establishments and look at the prices charged to see that these are places reserved for well-off, even wealthy clientele. We're talking about at least 600 to 1,200 reais per person per day for a beach chair and basic service, parking not included. So there's a primary obvious inequality between paying establishments and free passes. But what's more interesting, because less intuitive, is this. Upper class overrepresentation also concerns the free areas of the beach. These areas don't offer anything close to a faithful representation of national or even regional class structure. Pamplona Beach is certainly far less socially diverse than Ipanema or even Leblon. To understand this, we must consider both geophysical and symbolic bias. On the one hand, Pamplona is a rural beach, isolated at the end of a peninsula. On the other hand, certain social groups, especially locals, don't feel at home on this beach. It has a reputation for being noisy, flashy, crowded, with super yachts on the sea and helicopters in the air. But we must also embed the beach within a larger territory and seaside economy. Pamplona is the core of this high-end economy, which in turn contributes to shaping the place. This embeddedness within a broader context is also more important because there is a strong tendency to disconnect Pamplona from its natural and social surroundings as an ecosystem and as a territory. Making it a separate, autonomous, merely insular place is part of the production of a commodified space. Now, within a regional economy oriented toward exclusive goods and services, the upscaling of establishments over recent decades is striking. Moreover, this doesn't contradict environmental efforts. quite the contrary. Respecting high-quality environmental standards favors large companies. They can afford investing long-term and respect demanding requirements. This results in increasingly high prices and therefore an elite clientele with little or no local ties. We should add that when thinking about coastal gentrification, it's not only access inequality we must consider, but retreat inequality from the coast as well. Who will have to move inland? At what cost? And who will get the privilege to stay close to the shoreline in times of heat waves, for example? With a slight reduction in their footprint, beach establishments were allowed to stay, whereas in the 70s, so-called wild camping has been banned. Campsites had to either move inland or become permanent hotel-like facilities.
Beyond the problem of inequalities, there's the deeper question of social relations to beaches. By speaking of the beach as a resource offering ecosystem services, we risk conveying a problematic conception, one that is marked by utilitarian thinking that treats beaches as playgrounds or commodities at our disposal rather than dynamic, vulnerable environments. Envisioning the beach as a living environment while also recognizing it as a social historical construction means examining the class origin not only of beach users, but also of beach uses themselves. This means that we need to trace how dominant norms and habits have gradually prevailed. These govern our supposedly natural relation to beaches today. Historian Alain Corbin has shown that what we think of as natural beach culture was actually invented by the elite not so long ago. This elite-driven process led to the eviction of popular, pragmatic uses. It put local coastal populations to work serving newcomer vacationers. The beach practices we consider ordinary today, sunbathing, leisure activities, actually stem from a universalization of aristocratic, then bourgeois beach uses. This extension wasn't spontaneous. It was enabled by territorial development policies oriented toward economic growth. These operated under the influence of powerful industrial sectors, construction, transportation, tourism, all aimed at profit. The result was a massification of leisure uses that established the beach as a place of recreational visit and consumption, while marginalizing the subsistence relationships that coastal inhabitants maintain with these living environments. In short, we shouldn't forget that beaches now undergoing physical shrinking are social economic products. These socialized, developed, and sometimes commodified spaces result from specific processes, including land valorization, urban planning, property transfers, physical stabilization, and conversion into commercial and financial assets. This is what historian Andrew Cow calls coastal capitalism. Coastal spaces get inscribed in endless cycles of reinvestment and redevelopment. These naturally unsettled and moving environments are thus constrained, disturbed, and damaged by economic imperatives of permanence and stability. So to fully grasp coastal access inequalities, we must unravel the roots of the access issue itself. We need to recognize that what seems like the simple, universal act of going to the beach not only varies dramatically across time and space, it is also loaded with stakes that are hotter than ever in the current state of climate emergency. Thank you very much.
Thanks all the time.
Bom, muito obrigada. É incrível como as questões se repetem, né, nos diversos países mais avançados, mas forças políticas e econômicas realmente passam por cima, né, do bem comum e de decisões da própria lei que existe no papel. É impressionante.